on Panorama, undercover in a care home, desperately short of staff.
And I came 52 residents from Vanessa.
Short staff, all the time.
Workers recruited from overseas under pressure. They say they're being exploited.
He said, if you don't want to stay here on the contract, you can go back to India. I didn't have any choice.
We reveal how residents are being put at risk.
Staff recognised that care wasn't always adequate and things happened that they weren't happy about.
And investigate a care home boss who says he's willing to look the other way if things go wrong.
You think you don't make mistakes? We will always protect our staff. This protection isn't allowed outside.
Oh my God, he's almost justifying, if you make mistakes, we're going to cover it up. I'm actually in disbelief, to be honest. I'm a bit shocked.
The sound of the Northeast is BBC Radio Newcastle.
My name is Balakrishnan Balagopal. I came to the UK from India 23 years ago. This country has been good to me. I got married, became a British citizen and raised my children here. But the experience of many Indians arriving today is very different.
Some community members who work in social care tell me that they ended up being exploited.
So I'm going undercover to investigate.
Hi, I called you earlier in regards to a job.
I get a job as a care assistant at Addison Court near Newcastle. It's one of 15 care homes in the northeast of England, owned by Presbycare, part of the Malhotra Group. I'll be doing 12-hour shifts for minimum wage, just over £10 an hour.
Thank you. Silent. Hi, Balu.
More than 50 residents live at Addison Court. Their weekly fees average £1,100 and can be paid for by the local authority, NHS, or the resident's family. There are no rules about how many staff a care home needs, but right from the start I hear about a shortage of nurses.
When they booked me, they told me for 2 nurses. And I came 52 residents from Vanessa.
So how many should be there? Normally how many?
The top 2 floors are home to 38 residents who need nursing care.
So you were doing 2 floors?
Yes. But never mind.
Katie Morn is an NHS nurse. Until last year, she visited patients at Addison Court once a week.
There was a few occasions when I would be in Addison and I could clearly see that the nurse on duty was upset that they didn't want to work within the care home anymore, but they were unable to leave. They seemed to be sort of tied in. It was almost like they were slaves to the company, that they couldn't get out of it.
Now, a year later, I was seeing the same. One of the staff nurses is finding it hard to cope. When I see her shortly afterwards, she is visibly upset.
You got qualified nurse.
I catch up with her again at the end of her shift.
Oh, yeah, കണ്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്.
Nurses are on the government skilled worker list. Her visa to work here is sponsored by Presbycare. If she wants to leave the company, she has to find another employer to sponsor her. Otherwise, she will have to leave the UK.
എനിക്ക് വിസ കിട്ടിയെങ്കിൽ മാത്രമല്ലേ പോകാൻ പറ്റുള്ളൂ. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ എനിക്ക് നമ്മൾ ഇറങ്ങി പോകാമല്ലോ.
Across the NHS and social care in England, the government says 42,000 more nurses are needed.
We had Brexit, then we had COVID, and we saw vast numbers leave the care sector, mainly Europeans, and they never returned. The response was to add a large number of people within the social care sector to the skilled worker visa scheme.
Last year, around 140,000 visas were issued for health and care workers, more than double the previous year. 39,000 were issued to people from India. I speak to a nurse who worked at Addison Court to find out more about why some nurses there may feel trapped.
I was working as a nurse back home. Then I thought, like, why shouldn't I go to an English-speaking country, earn more, and will have better standards of life?
Ahmad, not his real name, came to the UK from India in 2018.
It was a nice experience. I would say like I came over. I was picked up by one of the employees from the Prestwick. They took me to Addison Court.
The government says employers shouldn't pass on recruitment costs they have incurred to overseas staff. But in Ahmad's case, that's what Prestwick CEO Bunty Malhotra did.
A new contract which said if I leave the company within 5 years, I have to pay a whole amount of money.
The government only allows employers to recoup the cost of visas, travel and accommodation. But Ahmad's contract shows if he left, he'd owe more than £4,000, including home office and legal fees, which should be paid by Prestwick Care.
Bunty said, if you don't want to stay here on the contract, you can go back to India. I didn't have any choice. I'm not going to leave because I can't pay that much money.
After a week at Addison Court, I've been put on my first night shift.
It's short staff all the time.
This is the only nurse on duty tonight. He's from an agency. Prestwick Care says during night shifts, one nurse is ample for 54 residents when supported by a team of carers, including some who can administer medication.
So you're just on your own today for the whole week.
Yeah.
So you have to give medicine to how many?
It's not only medication, because if you start to give medication, somebody asks you something, the resident will call you, and you lost the time.
What time are you supposed to give medication?
Bedtime, 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock.
Oh, it's 11 o'clock now,
Yeah.
and they are all sleeping.
Almost to do.
Administering drugs late can have serious consequences. This GP had patients in Addison Court in 2022. She's asked to be anonymous because she's worried about future employment.
That did seem to be a trend with certain medications and certain patients not getting their medication in a timely fashion. Parkinson's medication, that's very important to be administered on time. And also patients who are on insulin, who never got their insulins prescribed.
With the time critical medications, if you don't get them on time, it's going to affect your speech, it's going to affect your mobility. You could fall on the floor while trying to get to the toilet. So it can be really detrimental to that patient.
They certainly will have an increased risk of falling. That happened on several occasions.
The agency nurse covering the night shift says he raised short-staffing at Prestwick Care with CEO Bunty Malhotra when he was working at another of their homes.
I said, it's impossible to manage. Last night, I work in the building with 3 floors. How can to manage?
Okay.
If somebody has fall or it's emergency, 2 residents at the same time, how?
Yeah. So what did he say?
Hey, if you don't know, with your care homes. Oh, get out. Okay, I don't want to see your face.
Oh, he told you?
Yeah. He likes the money. For him, the care homes is the business.
Prestwick Care says Bounty Malhotra doesn't recall the conversation and says the allegation is incorrect.
One of the first things that struck me was just how profitable this group is.
Vivek Kotecha is a chartered accountant. He's looked at the accounts for Prestwick Care's parent company, Malhotra Care Homes Limited. Last year, it made £9.3 million profit.
Over the past 2 years, 2021, 2022, they've been making about 40% profit margins, which is very high. They seem to spend less of their income on staff than a fair number of their competitors. And that's kind of worrying because these kind of patients need attention, otherwise they're at risk of falls or injuries.
I had to put in 33 safeguardings. That's far too many.
In the 2 years Katie Maughan was visiting Addison, she was so worried about some residents, she made what are called safeguarding alerts to the local authority.
Lots of unexplained bruising to patients, lots of injuries.
One of those safeguarding alerts was for unexplained bruising on 79-year-old Joyce Bird.
Aesthetically, Addison Court was beautiful, but the care wasn't.
Joyce had Alzheimer's. She moved into Addison Court in 2020. The £1,242 per week cost of her care was paid by the NHS and local authority.
On the Sunday night, I got a call from one of the nurses to say that she had noticed fingertip bruising on my mum's arm that needed to be looked into.
Tracy rang the home's manager.
She eventually rang me back to say that she'd been up, checked mum over, everything was fine, there was nothing for me to worry about. Until I got the call on the Thursday morning from Katie to say, was I aware that she was going to report this to safeguarding.
Then Katie says she saw what she thought could have been causing the bruises.
I probably could have counted at least 10 times the carer pushing down on the shoulder to push her back into the seat, sit down.
Gateshead Council received the safeguarding alert. Its investigation into the cause of Mrs. Bird's unexplained bruising was inconclusive. But that wasn't all. Katie also raised concerns about a resident who she says had been left for 72 hours with severe constipation.
She was lying in bed with a severely distended abdomen, writhing all over the bed, crying for a man. So yeah, I knew straight away as soon as I seen her. I knew she was going to die. It was constipation. They should be speaking to the GP and saying, look, we still haven't had a bowel motion, and they should be getting medical advice. It's 100% neglect. Yeah.
Gateshead Council says it's unable to share the outcomes of the safeguarding concerns identified because it would involve releasing highly sensitive personal information. It says each case reported was responded to and managed in the best interests of the residents based on the evidence provided at the time. Back at Addison Court, I speak to colleagues about their concerns over staffing levels on night shifts.
പക്ഷെ നമ്മളിപ്പോ കൂടുതൽ പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ അവർക്ക് നമ്മളെ ഇഷ്ടപ്പെടത്തില്ല.
What the senior carer told me is that they have raised this issue with the management several times. However, they're not interested. There is nothing much being done about it. That is not right, to be honest.
Staff recognised that care wasn't always adequate and things happened that they weren't happy about. But they felt that there was no point bringing those concerns to the manager because she would either somehow make it their fault or just try and sweep it under the carpet, and they would end up in tears and in trouble.
Sometimes I felt that they were potentially not escalating certain concerns because it was over there that they could just be reported back. They didn't want to upset the company, but How can you do your job if you've got that over your head, that you're worried?
I just wanted to speak to you.
Okay, go on.
She's rushed off her feet too, but I managed to speak to the home's manager about understaffing.
She's just trying to bring it up to your notice.
I know.
Yeah.
Because they've never told me to overstretch and the missing education.
Staff shortages, not enough nurses, and then...
There isn't enough nurses, and I've raised that to senior management. Like today, there should be 2 nurses. And senior people are aware of that. National shortage, it's not just here, it's the NHS.
The home manager says it's completely untrue she fails to investigate complaints and that she has positive relationships with staff at the home. Since 2022, alongside nurses, carers have been added to the government skilled workers list and must be sponsored to get a visa. 9 of the Indian carers I meet at Addison Court say they paid between £6,000 and £10,000 to a recruitment agency called BGM Consultancy. BGM, which is based in Aldershot, is run by this man, Sunil Thomas. The government says employers should only work with agencies that don't charge fees. The Home Office charges £551 for a 5-year visa. But this carer says she paid BGM more than £9,000.
Unscrupulous agents, they are doing the recruiting in countries such as India, Kenya, where they are charging thousands of pounds for the visa. And so people come here with thousands of pounds of debt and then are tied into a particular care provider through the visa scheme. And then we are seeing examples of those people being exploited.
Presswick Care says it's now suspended all new arrangements with BGM Consultancy. BGM Director Sunil Thomas says he hasn't taken any funds towards recruitment of care workers to the UK and that any money paid would have been to sub-agents acting without his knowledge in India. The carer who says she paid BGM thousands is also facing a demand for money from Presswick Care. She now wants to leave and has been told she might have to pay the company's legal and administrative fees. Costs the government says should be paid by Presswick Care. Nurse Ahmed says the money Presswick Care wanted from him felt like a way to prevent him leaving, but he resigned anyway.
After I left, other staff members also felt that they could leave. The nurses who felt they were trapped in such a 5-year contract could feel better that they have other choices.
Presswick Care started legal action against Ahmed to recover the fees. It said he now owed more than £5,000. Ahmed decided to call CEO Bunty Malhotra and secretly recorded the call.
What you have done is immoral, unethical, and terrible. And I'm upset more than anything. I'm sad because I treated you like a son.
There was something else in Ahmed's contract, a clause more suited to high-flying executives. Bunty Malhotra was trying to stop the nurse from working for any competitor care home for 6 months.
You're not allowed to work around the corner. We haven't pursued you for that yet. If I started litigating with you, there'll be no limit to it.
The idea that these sorts of provisions are being used across a contract for senior care assistants and nurses seems to be absolutely ludicrous from a legal perspective. Those clauses are there to serve a purpose of contributing to making that individual feel trapped in their situation. They would not be upheld by a tribunal, by a court.
Presswick Care denies its contracts are designed to intimidate and says it's now reviewing all repayment clauses in them. Back at Addison Court, an important part of a carer's role is preventing and responding to falls. If a resident has a fall and is unable to get up by themselves, a hoist should usually be used. We are all trained to use them, but they take time and corners can be cut. While I'm undercover, I see 4 residents being lifted off the floor in what's known as a drag lift. According to Addison Court's own moving and handling policy, drag lifts should never be used. We showed the footage to Sarah Thornton, an expert in how to move and handle people safely.
That is a classic drag lift. The drag lift is a high-risk technique. The hold is under their arms. The person's body weight will pass through the shoulder joint. If the loading exceeded the tolerance levels of the shoulder joint, it would result in injury, such as shoulder dislocation or upper arm fracture.
Addison Court's falls prevention and management policy says, if a resident falls and shows signs of a fracture, they shouldn't be moved and a doctor or paramedic called. But I hear about one fall where the safety protocol doesn't appear to have been followed.
There's a man on the floor.
2 carers had gone to help a resident with Parkinson's who'd had a fall. Instead of using a hoist, they hauled him up.
And the physically picked him up and put him on the chair. Didn't waste about anything. Shouldn't have been picked up.
The next day, the resident's condition deteriorated.
Well, they couldn't get him up, couldn't get him off the bed, so they dropped her around and come out.
It turns out he had a serious injury.
When was it picked up that he had fracture?
They took him in on Saturday. They got operated on his head. And it's actually injured on it. It was an absolute shock.
That wasn't the first time an ambulance had been called. I'm told paramedics saw the resident on the day he fell, but were told he'd managed to get up by himself. So they didn't take him to hospital then, even though the home's own documents record he was in pain.
When the vehicle went to the paramedics and said that he got himself off the floor, and he didn't. You know, he didn't get his fracture. No, he couldn't have. So that's probably why the paramedics haven't took him.
The resident spent 3 weeks in hospital recovering from a broken hip. Trustpic Care says there is no evidence the paramedics were told the resident got up by himself, and the decision not to take him to hospital was based on a thorough physical examination. It says information has since come to light that he may have been lifted to a chair, but this lift was not recorded. It says 2 staff members who moved the resident have been suspended pending investigation. The resident eventually returned to Addison Court, but had another fall 6 weeks later. This time, his post-fall care followed guidelines, but he still ended up back in hospital.
Once you've had one fall, you're likely to have another. If the patient's injured, if they fracture their hip or they fracture an arm or a leg and they end up going to hospital, they can end up with lifelong consequences and life-limiting consequences.
Tracy's mother, Joyce Bird, whose bruising had been reported to the local authority, was supposed to get one-to-one care from 8 in the morning until 10 at night. But that didn't always happen.
The social worker would always say to me, your mum should never have a single bruise on her. No matter what medication she's given, because she has one-to-one care. So my thoughts were that there were numerous times that she had been left unattended, and that's why she was falling as much as she did.
Tracy's mother died at Addison Court in May this year. Her post-mortem examination said she should have been on one-to-one care, but that was not the case this morning. Joyce died alone.
It's really upsetting because, for me, families think the loved one's going to 24-hour care because they get round-the-clock care and they're getting looked after. And that's not what I witnessed.
In December last year, Prestwick Care had its license to sponsor overseas workers suspended by the Home Office. The CEO, Bunty Malhotra, calls a meeting to update staff.
I'm Bunty. I'm CEO of this group, so you work for me.
Only Indian employees have been asked to attend. Bunty Malhotra says he doesn't want them to leave. It's all about his bottom line.
Loyalty is two-way. I'm thinking if I lose you, what is Mr. White, Mrs. White going to cost me?
All nurses working in the UK must be registered with the Nursing and Midwifery Council, the NMC. Their professional registration is known as a PIN.
And if you work for an English company, if you work for NHS, one mistake, report it to NMC straight away. In here, in 37 years, touchwood, not single nurse has lost PIN. Not one. You think you don't make mistakes? You don't make mistakes? You don't make mistakes? But we will always protect our staff. We always say, our nurse, this mistake is a training issue. My staff is always guided to say, these are our children, they're loyal staff, they're good girls, they're caring girls. None of them are coming drunk at work. We protect. This protection isn't allowed outside.
Oh my God, he's almost justifying that if you make mistakes, we're going to cover it up, and almost scaring them that they should never leave his care home. They'd get reported to the NMC if they work for the NHS. Like, I'm actually in disbelief, to be honest. I'm a bit shocked.
After 8 weeks undercover, I leave Addison Court and make my own safeguarding alert to Gateshead Council. Many of the staff I work with were doing their best in difficult circumstances. The Home Office has now fully revoked Prestwick Care's license to sponsor overseas staff, and the regulator, the Care Quality Commission, has suspended Addison Court's good rating.
If you are in a position of power as a boss, you can exert a coercive control over an individual. And it happens because that individual is vulnerable, because they're loaded with debt, because they're told that they can only work for that service provider. Unscrupulous bosses use that as a means to control.
Prestwick Care says any suggestion that there is systematic wrongdoing or bad practice would be unfair and inaccurate. The safety and well-being of residents and staff remains paramount. It says it's fully committed to thoroughly investigating all concerns raised and taking appropriate actions as necessary. They say you can tell a lot about a society by the way it looks after its elderly. How it looks after those who care for its elderly is also important. As the UK increasingly relies on carers from overseas, those who look after our loved ones should be able to do their jobs free from exploitation.